Tonight, is Trump the only hope for the grand old party? And what do Canadian doctors and James Bond have in common? But first, gunnies beware. I'm Faith Goldy and you're watching On the Hunt.
Do you not have an answer for them, Justin? There is no left and right on this one. There is, however, right and wrong.
Good evening, Canada. Well, it should come as no surprise to you that a great deal of our On the Hunt viewers are law-abiding gun owners, hunters, sports shooters, and all-round firearms enthusiasts. But there's another group out there who might not necessarily own a firearm, but cares about the issues because, well, they love freedom and they realize that gun owners in this country have too little of it already, even as certain politicians try to infringe on us even more. So I want to start off this new program at the beginning of this new year with some of my concerns regarding the firearms file, given our country's new leadership. Now, I don't want to sow any scary seeds where we ought not fear a thing, and I certainly am aware that there was no substantive mention of gun control in, say, the last throne speech. However, we do know something of Prime Minister Trudeau's thoughts on guns, given his party's public platform heading into the last election. So I thought now would be a good time for us to perform a little exercise, for us to just comb through it, essentially line by line, and see if anything, well, sets off our radar. The platform begins with the words, "We will take pragmatic action to make it harder for criminals to get and use handguns and assault weapons." Which seems reasonable, right? I'd say. Except that just about every word that follows this sentence seems to target law-abiding gun owners, not criminals. Look here. The proposal says that Trudeau's Liberals will, quote, repeal changes made to Bill C-42. That's that Common Sense Firearms Act passed under the Harper Conservatives that allow restricted and prohibited weapons to be freely transported without a permit. Now here's just the eensy-teensy little issue. C-42 does neither of those things. Also, those permits, the ATTs, known in full as authorizations to transport, are, in every sense of the term, capital U, useless documents that amount to essentially a license on top of a license. So more paperwork for a group of citizens already under a mound of it. But you best have one, lest you end up a paperwork criminal and face years behind bars. Seriously. Then Trudeau promises he will, quote, put decision-making about the weapons restrictions back into the hands of the police. In other words, Trudeau's Liberals want to give reclassification powers back to the RCMP lab rats who created all those unnecessary dramas like those that unfolded with the Swiss Arms and CZ-858 crises, stories some folks at home might remember me covering way back in the Sun News days. The Liberals also want to modify the membership of the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee. Translation, and there's really no way to sugarcoat this, they want to stack it with antis. But it doesn't stop there. Canada's governing party is hoping for, quote, enhanced background checks for anyone seeking to purchase a handgun or other restricted firearm. Okay, let's be very clear. Save a cavity search? The government already has all my info. From dead family members, recent relationships or lack thereof, the state of my mental health or lack thereof, basically any pill I have or have ever not taken. So what exactly is it that they want? Time we put on our liberal thinking caps. Oh, I know. What they mean to say is that they want to install yet another layer of bureaucracy. Perhaps a CFO reassessment or guarantee with each new restricted firearm. This, should our hunch prove to be correct, would translate to weeks, even months in delays with every single purchase. Then Trudeau has the novel idea to, quote, require purchasers of firearms to show a license when they buy a gun. Yeah, except for the fact that we already do this in stores. But see, I think that this provision is actually aimed at internet sales. You listening to me, CGN folks? which would in effect kibosh legal exchanges for online retailers. Above that, Trudeau's government wishes to require all sellers of firearms to confirm that licenses are valid before completing a sale. Again, we already do that. But hold on a ticket. Why have one bureaucratic layer when you could have two? Perhaps retailers in Trudeaupia will have to call in every purchase to ensure validity. And Trudeau insists that firearms purchasers should be, quote, required to show a license when they buy a gun. Again, folks, we do this. But again, I'm pretty confident this provision targets internet sales with the aim of killing legal exchanges for online retailers altogether. But don't you worry, the Liberals they pinky swear promise that they will not create a new long gun registry. Now, putting aside the fact that I can't even buy a friggin' bullet without my name being recorded, now that Quebec is establishing its own provincial tracking system, it didn't take very long for Minister of Public Safety Ralph Goodale to give it the federal Liberal stamp of approval, the old 2 thumbs up. Finally, your new Trudeau government promises that Canada will become party to the UN's International Arms Trade Treaty. Oh, good! Because that's the same treaty that places the right to own, buy, sell, trade, or transfer all means of armed resistance, including handguns and ammunitions, under its prohibition. Also the same treaty, which according to Article 11 seems to hint at a registry of end users for all signatories. And the same treaty that demands that national governments, quote, take appropriate measures to enforce the terms of the treaty, including civilian disarmament. But don't you worry, the signatories can't get her done. Article 16 provides for UN assistance, including help setting up and the enforcement of stockpile management, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs. But I'm sure all of these headaches for sports shooters, hunters, and retailers is totally worth it, because the criminals are listening, right? Hey, don't look at me. I didn't vote for the guy. Stay right there. Your culture war machine is up right after this quick break. Welcome back. It's time for this week's Culture War Machine. Despite dead silence during the election, one issue, with or without assistance, promises to change the landscape of our country from this year onward: doctor-assisted suicide. Let's take a look at the story specs. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled Canadians have the right to doctor-assisted suicide. The ruling applies to those with severe and irremediable suffering, while it leaves the door wide open to people with both physical and psychological ailments. As it stands, the criminal code ban is set to be lifted in February of this year, though the AG is asking for a 6-month deferral. Meantime, Quebec is carrying on with their euphemistically labeled medical aid in dying legislation, while no consensus has been reached within or between the medical communities and governments at every level as to how we should bring our new reality to life. Joining us now in studio is Alex Schattenberg of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Alex, you're an expert. I know we could have you here for hours, but I want you to give us a brief overview of the roadblocks up against us right now. Are we as a country ready for this de facto and de jure reality as of February 2016?
The answer is absolutely not. The fact of it is that the Supreme Court struck down a law. It gave Parliament 12 months, and obviously there wasn't a bill in that time, nor was there time to have a bill anyway before the election. And now they're asking for a six-month extension. But at the same time, we've got all these different factors. You've got the provinces calling it health care, the federal government looking at it as a criminal code question, Quebec going on like wild cowboys with euthanasia. It's euthanasia, not assisted suicide.
Tell the audience, what's the difference between the two?
Euthanasia is when the doctor would lethally inject you, and assisted suicide is when a doctor would provide you the lethal dose, but you technically take it yourself. So in the case of euthanasia, it's always been defined as homicide, which is actually the proper definition. When someone kills you, whether you ask for it or not, that's a form of homicide, however that's dealt with. But the fact of it is right now Quebec, it's a very weird situation. According to the criminal code, it is completely illegal for a doctor to kill you.
Right.
And yet Quebec has started on December 10th to say it's okay for a doctor to kill you. And yet at the same time you had a Superior Court decision in Quebec that struck down the law, and then the appeals court said, we'll grant you an appeal. And at the same time, they said you can go ahead and kill people then during the appeal. It's possible that the Court of Appeal will say Quebec's law can't go forward, and yet it's possible they might have already been killing people. It's a crazy situation, I would say only in Canada.
But let alone in Quebec.
And yet at the same time in Belgium, where they legalized euthanasia in 2002, there's this big debate going on right now around the whole question of psychological suffering, because they've been doing euthanasia for people who are having psychological suffering. And there was 2 recent cases, one of a 85-year-old woman who was physically healthy, even though she was 85, she was physically healthy, exercising every day, but after her daughter died, she wanted to die by euthanasia. She said she had no more purpose to live, and the doctor went ahead and did it.
And according to the Quebec legislators, they did use the Belgium model as a huge springboard for developing their own legislation. I want to look into a little bit more when it comes to the Canadian example and what we're seeing unfold before us. This expert panel recently put out their report of their suggestions. One of the things, and for folks, I think our audiences, they're going to find this disturbing, they have a mature minor doctrine, which is to say they don't really want to see age limits here. They say, you know what, some 12-year-olds will know when they want to end their life. Is this concerning to you?
Well, the example they used was the mature minor 12-year-old, but in fact what they're proposing is that it could be at no age limit.
Right.
So therefore, what I'm really concerned about when it comes down to is that child born with disabilities, and the parents are saying, we don't want a child with a disability. And now you get this big debate, oh, what should we do? Are we going to not provide any treatment for that child so that child dies naturally? Or are we going to lethally inject the child? And how is that going to come? Because in both Belgium and the Netherlands, they do that. Children born with disabilities, a certain number of them are euthanized every year. And this is a reality of eugenics and the culture and eugenics and the whole issue of euthanasia. And I'll go one step further. They called this an expert panel from Ontario. And this is really an Ontario panel, even though they had a few other people. This was a stacked panel of pro-euthanasia lobbyists. And it was a crazy situation. When they announced the panel, my first response is, what is Maureen Taylor doing as the co-chair of such a commission? What is Jocelyn Downey doing in this commission? These are pro-euthanasia people.
Massively.
Openly pro-euthanasia people. And what was, you start naming them and you're saying, how could they call that an expert panel? This was a euthanasia lobby sort of love-in coming up with these recommendations. And the fact of it is that they go wide open. They do not differentiate between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Even in the Netherlands, where euthanasia and assisted suicide have been legalized since 2001, they differentiate between the two. They recognize that there's a difference between lethal injection and a doctor prescribing a lethal dose and you taking it yourself. And there's a lot of things to it. Like, for instance, they don't even respect doctors' rights to say no.
And I want to bring this up because this is something, I've spoken to Catholic doctors and just doctors who are like, you know what, I'm into palliative care, not killing my patients across this country. And they're all worried about their own rights, their freedom of conscience, and their own commitments to the medical field as we develop this legislation. Are you convinced that there are going to be any safeguards out there? And I'm not talking about just the religious affiliated institutions, but private medical doctors.
You mentioned religious affiliated institutions. They did not provide rights for them not to have to do it. They made it clear that those religious affiliated institutions would have to refer also. But here's the point. A doctor who believes it's absolutely wrong to kill his patients or her patients, they don't have to be religious to believe that. They could simply believe,
absolutely.
I don't think it's a good idea for me ever to be lethally injecting my patients. I don't view my patients as people who I should be killing. They're going to be forced to refer according to this expert panel. And that's a crazy situation. If you think it's wrong to kill someone, obviously you're going to also think it's wrong to refer them to the killer. It's obvious that that's exactly the same.
And this is something that they're proposing is effective referral. Basically
Absolutely.
Hiring a contract killer if you're a doctor who's not into killing your patient yourself.
Essentially, that's exactly what's going on. They're saying you're going to have to do this. And the reality is that if someone absolutely wants euthanasia and it's absolutely legal, the sad reality is there'll be doctors willing to do it. You don't need to force these doctors into having to refer to someone else in order for people to have euthanasia, if that's what's being imposed upon us. Secondly, they also did something else. In Belgium, the studies show that nurses, which are not allowed to do euthanasia in Belgium, the law says only doctors. The studies show that nurses are involved in doing it too, which means that they're not following the law, right? The law is being ignored. And yet, in this expert panel says nurses should do it too.
And they also don't want us to report the fact that euthanasia or assisted suicide was the cause of death. They want us to basically put down, this pre-existing condition. Alex, we're running out of time. I so appreciate you being here. And I will say, as someone with 2 parents who have worked in the medical field, as someone who was was a caregiver for 6 years for an ill mother, I'm worried that we are going to be neglecting palliative care. We're going to be neglecting the very, very important medical profession and the professionals within there. And we're going to be, in effect, creating a duty to die when jurisdiction after jurisdiction has proven there is no such thing as safeguards. Alex, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, don't go anywhere. When we return, she's young, she's conservative, and she's American. She's got a lot to say. Gabriella Hoffman, she joins us next with a look at that country's presidential race. That's next. Stay with us.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back. It's time for Battleground 2016. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's just Trump's comb over catching wind as he blows past his opponents. Say it ain't so. Before we welcome our very special guest, let's take a look at the bullet points. Trump is indeed sitting pretty at number 1, but is Ted about to cruise past him in this GOP race? Meantime, Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush remain establishment favorites as Hillary Clinton is poised for a coronation. Folks at home might want to reconsider their Netflix subscriptions in the run-up to November when the good old US of A picks her next president. Joining us now is one of that country's fiercest conservative activists and bloggers, who I might add is equally mean with a firearm or fishing rod in her hand, my good friend, Gabriella Hoffman. Welcome to you, Gabriella.
Delighted to be here, Faith. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Okay, I gotta ask you, is the Trump train about to run out of steam?
Let's hope. Let's hope so. I think the tides are turning for actual consistent conservatives, so that's what everyone should be looking out for in this upcoming electoral contest.
You know what, I agree with you. I mean, give me a Ted Cruz. Rand Paul, I don't know how he's going to do in a general. I mean, a Fiorina, I'd be happy with. And yet, there is something about Trump that's resonating. I think he's been pumped up by the media for sure, but it's this kind of outside Washington, say what you feel like saying what you mean, even if it's not, really below the surface. Do you think, though, that what would a Trump nomination mean? Let's just start there, because I think that the U.S. is basically getting on a pretty bad path if they do put him on the ticket.
Well, yeah, it would spell a lot of problems for the movement, and not necessarily for the reasons that more establishment forces have played out for, but he doesn't really have any concrete solutions as to how to tackle the all-pervading problems plaguing our society and plaguing this country's politics today. It's great that he's brought attention to certain issues, but he's not the perfect or I would say adequate spokesperson for that position to lead this country in the right direction. Someone like a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul, or maybe even a Carly Fiorina, but I kind of have my doubts about her having come from California. But someone who actually has a proven conservative record, I think, is more equipped to take on that role as the GOP nominee and hopefully the victor in the general election.
Now, I worry about Rand going into a general, although I think he'd be great for the party and certainly for the base. But from your vantage point, you're a young conservative, you've got your finger on the pulse of not just Washington, but the entire country and what matters to the citizens. What are the biggest issues? And I know you and I are kind of Team Cruz in many ways. And why do you think Ted Cruz is prepared to tackle them?
Well, I think a lot of those issues were illuminated at the most recent debate with the degree of how much government interference should be in surveillance, how much we should be involved in abroad. And there was a huge contrast between, let's say, like a Rubio and Cruz in terms of that. Even though they're both heralded as conservatives, you can obviously see who's more liberty-minded versus who's more hawkish, and who's more willing to still use tools of government, and oftentimes still kind of incline themselves, ironically, to more dangerous means with the surveillance state. I think Rubio should be very skeptical of that, having come from a background of Cuban anti-communism. But you definitely see the contrast between the two, even among those two particular candidates who are viewed as to be conservative, young blood, fierce candidates. And they're both the same age, in their mid-40s, and poised to certainly lead the Republican Party in a better direction with their youth and their more conservative positions.
I love the fact that you brought up the surveillance state, because I think this is something that really does matter to folks, especially in our generation and elsewhere, because we are the social media users and the rest of it. And you've got NSA lovers like Marco Rubio, but then you have Trump saying we got to basically stop parts of the internet, and I'm thinking, okay, that doesn't sound very freedom-loving American to me. So we have to make sure that's a matter of record. Who do you think is best poised to basically knock Hillary down when it comes to them in a face-off in November?
I think Cruz can be positioned to do that for sure. I'm not sure about the others, given that they don't have an arsenal, they don't have a smart campaign in place. And you need to be tough, and you need to have the principles in order to beat Hillary, because we've had so many soft, moderate candidates go on to challenge Democrats unsuccessfully, and the Republican Party wonders why they continue to lose. They don't put out principled candidates, and someone like a Ted Cruz can certainly put that principled message in place, and that's certainly needed today.
Here. I think unless you're just a die-hard Democrat, I don't understand really the logic of voting for Clinton. Last question. Part of what got Obama the presidency was the female vote. I'm thinking about now, especially the categories of safety moms, no terrorist is ever going to touch my kid, who might incline themselves even towards a Marco Rubio. Do you think Cruz has the chops to get the female vote mobilized?
I certainly think so, especially if he taps into women trying to defend themselves with firearms, with self-defense, other means of self-protection, because we, just like any other sector of American society, is equipped to protect ourselves, and we don't want to be lumped into a category or fall into the Marxist rhetoric hand that we are supposed to be reliant upon government. So someone like a Cruz or someone similar to him could certainly channel that empowerment message, and that certainly needs to be communicated.
I love where you're at, Gabriella. I hope that we get to see a lot more of you in the run-up to the election, and next time we're in the same town together, promise me we're going to go shooting?
Yes, I'll take you fishing too, especially if it's warm enough.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Gabriella, thanks so much for joining us. Folks at home, don't touch that keyboard. When we return, On the Hunt has your weekly quote of honor. Stay with us.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Today's quote of honor fittingly comes from U.S. Senator and GOP candidate Ted Cruz. He says, 55 years ago, when my dad was a penniless teenager, thank God some well-meaning bureaucrat didn't put his arm around him and say, let me take care of that. As someone who has been raised in a household with hardworking immigrant grandparents who came to this country with literally seeds in their pockets, I learned two valuable lessons, noticeably totally absent from today's culture. One, no one owes you anything. And two, hard work will get you everywhere. Let me tell you how you can contact us here at On the Hunt, faith@TheRebel.media, or find me on the tweet machine at FaithGoldy. Folks, I hope that you enjoyed this show, and hey, you're celebrating Christmas today on the old calendar, and I know a lot of my Yuki friends are. A Merry Christmas to you. Until next week, keep vigilant, and remember, we've got your six.